Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, we're going to be replacing the rear shocks and coil springs on our 2002 Lexus GS 300. And what we're going to be using is Tanabe NF210 springs and KYB shocks. In order to gain access to the rear shock towers, you're going to need to pull these panels off in the back. So what we're going to do is use a 3-piece body clip removal kit that we got from KD Tools. We use this all the time. We just simply store it back in its original package. Very handy to have, and it's the best way to keep from damaging the clips when you pull them out, especially on an older car because the plastic tends to break very easily. So we'll get the panels removed and we'll show you where the top of the shock towers are, and we'll show you that momentarily. Okay, you're going to loosen up these 3 nuts that go on top of the shock tower, not the center one, just the 3 outside ones before you jack up the car. So we've gotten those loosened, and now we're going to loosen the wheel nuts. I'll show you that here in a second. Before you jack up the car, you want to take the wheel nuts loose. And so we've just broken them loose. That's all we've done. And then we jacked up the car. We used the center of the differential as the jacking point. And so we brought it all up and put 2 jack stands, and we used some pinch weld type pucks that go underneath to protect the pinch welds. Lowered the car down to where they're on the jack stands. And then we put 2 safety jack stands in the back of the car. I'll show you that here in a second. So as I mentioned, I have 2 safety jack stands. I also have the floor jack still under the differential, and I have it jacked up so it's barely making contact. And in addition, I'm going to take the wheel off and put it underneath the car so nothing can fall on me. I'm wearing safety glasses also. And so I'm going to try to work completely safe so nothing happens that's bad. And when I get the wheel off, I'll show you what to do next. Okay, I have the wheel off now and I'm ready to start doing some disassembly. Down here at the lower part of the shock tower, I need to use an impact driver to loosen the nut that goes to the bolt that holds the bottom of the shock to the arm. And then also there's a link behind it. Behind the shock, there's a link. You have to take the nut and the bolt out for that, completely out, so that's loose. And then last, you'll mark the position of the adjuster that's next to the brake, and you're going to mark it with a magic marker so you can put it back in the same relative position. It's a cam assembly. So after you get done doing this job, you have to get it aligned anyway, so you just want to be able to get it back to the close relative position. So I'm going to get that done. Those are all going to come loose. I'm going to put a jack underneath this whole assembly so it doesn't try to come down on me, so I can control the release of the spring and everything. And I'm going to show you a couple other bolts we'll take out, and then we'll get underway. You're going to have to take these 2 bolts loose, and then also the 3 nuts on top of the shock tower from inside the trunk. You're going to take those out. And when we get this all done, this whole assembly will just come down and we'll be able to slide it out. It's not easy, but it's not real hard. And then we'll be able to put some spring compressors on, take this old spring off. We're just going to use this piece here and the top on the new assembly. So then we'll assemble the new assembly, and I'll show you all that as we go along. At this point, we've pulled out the old strut assembly, and we had to actually have 1 spring compressor on it to get it loose enough to be able to pull out. We actually had put 2 spring compressors on it and brought it down a little bit, and then we had to take 1 off to get it out of the way. So now that we have it out, we've put 3 spring compressors on so that we can safely take the top nut off up here and take this assembly apart. And we're going to reuse the top piece, and we're going to replace the shock and the coil, and the coil is going to be a little shorter one. At this point, we've built up the rear strut assembly. We're ready to install it. So here's the new spring. The round side goes to the bottom, flat side goes to the top. There's a bump stop that goes inside here. We put the nut on after we use spring compressors, and we put some inspector's lacquer on there. The original shock tower had inspector's lacquer or some kind of sealant on there, so we wanted to do something similar. We didn't want to use Loctite, but we did snug this bolt up really well. And so we have everything put back together the way it should go. And now we're going to take off the spring compressors and we're going to go ahead and reinsert it back into the car with the new shock and spring. Okay, at this point I have the new shock tower in, and what I did is I did not have to use spring compressors to take the old shock tower out of the vehicle, but once you get it out, you're going to have to put spring compressors on, at least 2, if not 3, to compress the spring so that you can remove it and you can take off this top piece here and the piece that goes on the very top inside the trunk. So we took those pieces off the old shock tower, including the bump stop that goes inside, and while we had them out, we lubricated them really well with some special silicone that's made for rubber components. Reassembled the whole thing using spring compressors to compress this spring while I attach the end. And you have to be very careful with that because there's a lot of kinetic energy stored in there and you can get hurt very easily. So now I put in the 2 bolts, and I'm going to put the nuts on top of the shock tower and get those all tightened up with some Loctite. And then I'm going to come back in and start reassembling the parts down here, starting with the link first. That's the easiest thing to reconnect first. So I'll be right back. Okay, at this point I have the shock sort of sitting in, and what I did was I went ahead and put this link bolt back through with a nut on it and some Loctite, tightened it up good and snug. Went ahead and put the shock lower bolt in, and I put the nut facing towards the back of the car this time. It was facing towards the front, and that's so I can get my air impact driver on it next time if I need to. I went ahead and used a breaker bar and tightened it up real good and tight, probably about 100 foot-pounds or so. Doesn't really need to go any more than that. Probably I actually was closer to 75 or 80. But I used Loctite on it so I wouldn't have to over tighten it. And then underneath here, we went ahead and put the adjusters back on and tightened them up. And I had put marks on them, so that's where we are now, is where the marks are. And this will need to be realigned since the springs are lower, and it's going to lower that rear end a little bit. So that's basically it. I'm putting the rear tire on now, and that's all there is to this video. Thank you for watching.